What up, guys? I haven't posted again in a couple days, so I don't know, maybe I guess you're probably used to it at this point. Oh my god, you're kidding me. What perfect timing. Check this out. Check out.
That's the noise I was making when I couldn't open the door.
I literally just started a vlog. I'm 35 seconds into it.
Well, 35 seconds into vlog time. That's why I showed up. I timed it. Knack for knowing people are vlogging. Doesn't really come in handy that often, but I'll take what I can get. Superpowers.
Okay, I was just about to start talking about how YouTube is down right now. Like, straight up, I couldn't access it on my phone or iPad. Because I was going to go through and look at all the comments and find something to talk about. So instead, I'm just going to talk about my computer and my computer specs and something like that. So the computer I run is a computer I built. It's a PC, and I basically purchased it with the YouTube Next Up money I got last February. And it came out in the end to be about $3,000, which is a very expensive computer. But it's also one of the most powerful computers out there right now. There are a few throttles in there that I could make it quicker by getting another hard drive and combining it together into a RAID configuration. But I'll talk about that in a moment. So basically, it's really easy. If you want a good computer, build it. I think I talked about it the first time I got a computer was because I got in a car accident. It wasn't my fault, so I got reimbursed from the other guy's insurance, and it was just a crack in my bumper that wasn't worth replacing, and it was $600. So I took that $600 and I bought, decent but budget-priced computer parts and built a computer that was 10 times better than the laptop I was working on, just off of $600. And now it's even more so. You can get a great computer for $600 right now. That being said, I knew I was going to be working with Red Epic footage, so I wanted a monster computer. So if you want a monster computer and you're ready to spend, more than $2,000, listen up. So you want to get a good motherboard first off. That's not first off. You choose your motherboard last because you want to make sure that all the parts that you choose will work with the motherboard. You don't want to sacrifice parts because of a motherboard. You want to get a better motherboard to work with your parts. Motherboards, fortunately, aren't too expensive. A decent motherboard will cost you $200. I think my motherboard was $350, and that was because it was a really nice one that works well with a high-speed RAM and the CPU that I was using. And the other components that you generally get are, hard drive, CPU, graphics card, GPU, and your RAM. RAM being the random access memories, just like 4 gigs, 8 gigs, 16, 32. I have 32 gigs now. My current machine that I was running before, that I did all my videos on previously, I think that was the second time I had upgraded it, and it has 16 gigs. But when I first built it, it only had 4 gigs, and it was a 32-bit system, so you couldn't use more than 4 gigs anyway. But now, because all the programs are 64-bit, they could use more than 4 gigs, so I went up to 16 gigs. And for the vast majority of uses, you will not need more than 16 gigabytes of RAM. I got 32 gigs because I'm doing Fume Effects simulations and complex After Effects things that will use all of that RAM. But I don't have to. It just makes things slightly easier, slightly faster. But not that much faster than using 16 gigs. The jump between 8 to 16 is a big jump. Jump from 16 to 32 isn't quite as noticeable, but if you're maxing out your system, you will notice it. The other thing, GPU. I got the NVIDIA GTX 680. That was like a $600 video card. I think it's a little bit further down in price now, but it's one of the best NVIDIA cards you can get right now. Or at least a year ago it was the best, and now they came out with like the Titan, then the 780, I think. But that being said, it's still really good. It has like 4 gigs or 5 gigs of video RAM. Really fast. I don't really know the specs for the GPU. I just know it was really good, so I got it. I'll get to hard drives in a moment. The CPU I got, originally I got the 3930K from Intel. It's the Intel i7 3930K, and that's the exact same processor that Sam and Nico and Freddie and Brandon all have. But I ended up selling that one to a friend because you can't return them through Newegg. You can't buy a processor and return it, even if it's completely unopened and untouched, which is really, really dumb in my opinion. But I made the mistake of buying it without remembering that a good friend of mine works at Intel up in Oregon, and he gets, you know, not customer discount, employee discount, that's it, half off. And so he was like, dude, get this processor. It's $1,050. It's $1,000 for this processor, which is super ridiculous because the processors I've always had up until that point were all like $150, $200 processors. The first one I got was the AMD Phenom 2. It was a quad-core 2.5 gigahertz, I think. And the next one I got was also a quad-core. It was the Intel i5 something, 550? I don't know. So the one that I ended up going with, it was something X. I can't remember it right now. But it was a $1,000 processor that I got for half off. So, thank you, Robbie. Which meant that it was actually cheaper than the 3930K Intel i7 processor. And I'm throwing these numbers out here, they're just names, but what it was is a hexa-core processor hyper-threaded. So you've heard of like quad-core, you've heard of like, oh, a dual-core laptop. That just means there's 2 brains essentially that run simultaneously to each other, 2 separate physical cores that handle all your processes. They can get faster, like back in the day before dual core came out, they were like hitting 4 gigahertz processors, and you're just like, that's ridiculous. You don't need any more speed than that. And then they essentially doubled that speed by doubling the amount of processors. So that was probably the biggest breakthrough that I didn't personally see coming, and then in hindsight I have no idea why I didn't see coming because it's obvious. But anyway, so then they went up to quad core, and soon they're going to be coming out with octa-core, but right now they're also doing hexa-core, and that's where my processor comes in. Mine's only just a little bit faster than Sam and Nico's and more overclockable, and I'm ashamed to say I still haven't overclocked it. I have a good water cooling system and everything too. Oh, that's another thing you can get. It's only like $100 for a decent, very good water cooling system that will help your system out. So yeah, hexa-core processor, hyper-threaded, which means each brain has firmware installed that basically allows it to act as 2 separate brains. It works. I don't really understand the technology behind it all too much, but it's essentially just each brain, each core, is able to process simultaneously 2 different processes at the same time, which essentially acts as 2 cores. So that means my processor has 12 cores to it that could each run simultaneously. And that's great for rendering multiple frames at the same time. Although don't use the multi-processing in After Effects. Don't do that. There's a good tutorial out there to show how you can use the special script in After Effects if you want to render multiple frames at the same time. But yeah, regardless of that, 12 cores. If you want a beast machine, you want a 12-core processor or a 6-core hyper-threaded. Quad-core hyper-threaded at the very least. If you want to do good editing smoothly, if you want to do editing without too much waiting and hassle, at least get a quad-core hyper-threaded. You may want to go for a quad-core, but it's not that much more just to get a hyper-threaded quad-core, and you're essentially doubling your power right then and there. So go for a hyper-threaded quad-core if you can. I think that's only $200–300 for one of those. Which brings me to hard drives. Well, I mean, also you want to get a good cooling system. Here's the thing. there are fan systems, which essentially is just a heat sink with a fan to it. And the heat sink is just, it's literally just metal. It's supposed to draw heat away from the CPU. You attach it to the CPU, and it's metal with all these fins, so it cools off really quickly, and it sucks the heat out of the CPU. And then there's a fan attached to it that blows air over it, and through convection cooling, it cools off your CPU. The other type of system is a water cooling system. It's essentially the same sort of thing, but instead of air, it's using a liquid, and there's fans going through like a, I can't think of the name for it, like the grill cooling system. And it cools off the liquid, and cooling water liquid is easier and quicker to cool off metal than air. So those are usually better. However, you don't want to go middle of the road on either one. You either want to get a good airflow system or you want to get a good water flow system. You don't want to get a mediocre one of either. So, I mean, yeah. Like I said, the water cooling system I got was like $110. It was the H100i, I think. Fantastic. Absolutely great. So hard drives. That brings me to another topic.
What? What again?
You probably have like, you don't care what I'm talking about.
CPUs, RAM, which means random access memories, hard drives. I learned so much from listening.
So, hard drives. What I did, I don't know if I'd do again, but it works well for what I'm doing. Basically, I got two 2-terabyte hard drives and one SSD. Those are my hard drives. I installed my operating system and I run all my projects and programs off of the SSD. That's because the SSD is really fast, it's really efficient, and there's no like spin up or idle times that you have to wait for like with a normal disk. Granted, if you get a good normal disk, it's not too bad. The reason why I got two 2-terabyte hard drives is so I can mirror them. They're essentially a backup of each other, and they have the exact same data on each hard drive. So that's 2 terabyte. It's essentially they morph into one 2-terabyte hard drive. If I was to do it again, I'd probably do it a little differently. I wouldn't have it as an actual mirror, because how that works is that, you know, if one of the hard drives dies, you still have the other hard drive. You don't lose your data, which is great. However, if you accidentally delete something permanently, you can't save it from your other drive. So it's like whatever mistakes you personally make, or if a virus comes and wipes your hard drive, that's on you. It doesn't fix that. So, and hard drives are good enough that they tend to not fail these days. So it's kind of redundant, in my opinion. I might try to figure out some sort of system where I undo it. What's a better system, and RAID systems tend to do this better, like servers, is what, like once or twice a week, they actually go through and back up your entire hard drive automatically without you doing anything. So it'll make a copy of your hard drive. So then it'll be copied. It's like autosave, essentially, as opposed to always doing the same thing at the same time. So the SSD, I actually run all my After Effects files off of. I render to it. My program, my operating system is on it, and what makes that great is because it's super fast, it boots up. I shut down my computer every night because if I put it to sleep, the network that it's plugged into will wake it up for whatever reason. So I have to actually shut it down. But it's great because I just hit that on button, not even 20 seconds later, it's up, all the programs are already loaded, and I'm ready to go. Because sometimes like you boot up your computer and you see your desktop and you're like, yeah, but then you have to wait another like 2 or 3 minutes while all the programs start up, little things pop up in the bottom right corner. This is instant. That's what makes an SSD great. That on top of, you know, everything else that's really fast. And I recently made a purchase just a few days ago of a new 500 gigabyte SSD drive. The other one I was using, I think, was a 200 gig, maybe 256, I'm not sure. But I kept running out of space on it. I kept having to delete project files or basically move them to the hard drive. Because that's the point of the 2 terabyte hard drive, is that like that's where you store everything. You work with all your project stuff on the SSD, and when you're done with it, you move it to the hard drive to make room for your next project. Or in this case, my next effect shot. So I'll work on an effect shot, and I'll move all the renders and project files back over to the hard drive when I'm done working on it. But I'll keep my After Effects files in an effects folder on the main hard drive because After Effects files are not that large. They're like 1 to 10 megabytes, whatever. Sometimes there'll be more if you have a lot of layers in it, but that doesn't really matter. So, right, that being said, I filmed 420 gigabytes worth of footage for this 10-minute Harry Potter thing. That's almost half a terabyte of footage that I shot in 2 days on the Red Epic at 5K resolution. So I couldn't put that on the 256 gig hard drive. I was having to draw from the 2 terabyte hard drives. And it actually hasn't been that bad. It loads just fine, especially when you're working in After Effects. The first thing I do, literally, when I open up After Effects, the first thing I do is hit RAM Preview. And that loads all your files into your memory. So, and that just keeps it stashed there, or a stashed cache, if you will, of all your files in your memory, and you can just, it's quicker, scrubs through, because then you're not reading from either your hard drive or your SSD, you're reading from your memory banks. But I wanted to be able to render, especially now that I'm doing 4K renders, I needed the extra space that was quick. So Premiere has this cool thing where it's like you could go to Project Manager under Edit and consolidate all your files into a new location. And so even though I used 420 gigabytes worth of footage, or rather I shot that much, I was only using like 230 gigabytes of that, because there's a lot of clips, takes that you just don't use. So I was able to consolidate all those into a new project file, moved all my files to that new location on my new SSD. Which is great because now I have like 150 gigabytes of free space on an SSD that I can, export my 4K renders to and all that good stuff. So that'll be good. I'm starting to store all my Fume Effects simulations there. It's quick. It's always better if you can render to separate hard drives than the one you're reading from, even on an SSD. So that's also fantastic. That's pretty much it for now. This is a very long vlog. Apologies for that. But if you want to make a good computer, Google it. There's literally tons of information out there. It's like building Legos. It's easier than you think. And a motherboard, just make sure you go through and see all the things like this type of memory you have, the socket type for your CPU is all compatible with a motherboard, and you just get the motherboard. It's pretty straightforward. Then a case, you can get pretty much any case. Literally, any case is fine. As long as it's big enough. Just make sure it's big enough. Or if you want a small case, make sure all the other stuff you get is small enough, your motherboard. And just, yeah, it's easy. It's not that hard. I thought it would be the hardest thing ever, but then I realized it wasn't, and I did it, and I've never looked back. That's all for today. This is a very long vlog. Apologies for that. I'll talk to you later.